welcome, Nick, to my first time that we've actually met face to face. You were telling me you were going to set this year aside to finish War and Peace. And that you hate not finishing a book. You were on page 195, and you decided you must go the full, I don't know how many pages, 2,000 or so.
Yeah, 1 point something. Huh?
So I went and got your book,
Thank you.
and you get to page 195 and it's nearly finished.
Yeah.
So, but it's been a fascinating read for me because I have a relationship with Soweto as a social worker, and it brought back so many wonderful memories, and some of them quite painful, from when I tried as somebody from the northern suburbs of a privileged white South African to cross the divide, as it were, and to understand the life of the Soweto people. But I have to say, sadly, I haven't had that much to do since in the last 10, 15 years, because I've been so involved with the Amadiba and the Wild Coast.
Yes.
But I want you to just tell me about your life in Soweto, because it seems to me you have quite an attachment to township life and culture.
Okay, thanks, John, for inviting me, and then also talking about a book. And it's quite a privilege, actually, to come here, for instance, to talk more about my work. And also, I heard you talking about a story of Kolobin, for instance. That's the story that I also worked on when I was still at on Getaway magazine. Yeah, so it really humbles me that you read it, actually, and tells me that you liked it, actually. So about my story in Soweto, I was born there, actually, 73. So I was born in that area that you talked about, where there's a tank and Ishawelo. So that's where also President Ramaphosa comes from. Yeah. And quite a number of political activists, actually. So meaning that my life was more of, I was born in 73. That's around the time when I think there were lots of political turmoils, for instance. 3 years later after I was born, although I don't have any recollection, I don't know anything about it. I'm only reading about it. The June 16, 1976. You find that people were more active around, politically active. You know, it was around the time of Steve Biko's death, maybe a year later. Robert Sobukwe incarcerated and died, actually, another year later, I think 78 and stuff. So it was around the time when there was a lot of black consciousness movement going around, conscientizing us about things that are happening around us, especially racism and apartheid. So and then so you grow up political. So when you grow up political, everything that you look around you compare to your white counterparts, although your white counterparts are just in the mind by then, because you're not allowed to get into their spaces. So I grew up around that time, so lived in Shawelo until I think early 90s or something like that. Yeah, we went to live in Orlando West in Vilagazi Street. Also, it's a political kind of a street, for instance. So that culture of political awareness, that I got from Shawelo, for instance, came with me to Orlando West, because in Orlando West that's where you found the leaders themselves. Mandela lived there, although he was still in jail, of course. That there was Zeximo Tuping, of the PAC, lived there. So there was this strong ANC and strong PAC. So it made my political awareness to grow. And then also to understand the world around me, that is a world that is divided in black and white. So I'll say that I grew up very much, I lived both in a apartheid era and post-apartheid era. So it's easier for me when I'm writing to compare these transitions.
So you turned 21, you became an adult at the
Actually,
age of
I voted in 1994. I voted, you know.
So you were able to vote?
Yeah, and I was already at a university. I was doing first year at Wits University. I voted, I was able to vote. So it's because of that political consciousness that I came out with, you know. Yeah, you find that you grow up in the, more especially in Orlando West, you'll find that, you know, there were lots of guys that were in exile. You know, you go to this family, you know, every next family, they have a member who has been into exile. I remember in Orlando West exactly, somebody was telling me, oh, you know, in 1976 when the students were marching, because that's the same route that students marched in 1976. In 1976 when students marched, they used to shoot, they shot at this house, even showed us the holes on the roof of the house. So imagine how that does to a person who is very much into history, most people South African history.
And what did you study? Did you study
law? I did. Actually, what I did at Wits in 1994, I did African literature, and then I also did political studies. But history was my secondary measure. So the measures that I came out with is African literature and political studies. So I did history for 2 years. Yeah.
I'm delighted here because, of course, I didn't do African literature in my day, but I've learned, because you at least learn to read properly, and I've reading your book, reading Ben Okri, who has become now for me a great inspiration to help make my shifts of consciousness out of because it's very hard with those who grow up in privilege. You want to make the world over in terms of what you know and think is good for them. So you have then a very potentially paternalistic or patronizing kind of ethos from people. What was your first published work? How did you get them into writing these stories?
Being a writer actually was not my first choice, you know. My first choice was being a lawyer. So what I did was that when I applied at Wits University around that time in 1994, because that's when the floodgates opened, you know, because as you know, Wits was it was formerly white institution for that matter, and then later on it allowed many blacks to go into the university. And when I went there, applied for law, and then they said to me, your matric results, you don't have too much points, you have enough credits. So, but you can go for a second choice, which is BA. And then that's when I did my BA. And then I looked around. I mean, getting into African literature, for instance, was a matter of me not knowing what I can do. I didn't even know that they offer African literature, actually. I think I wanted some English studies or something. I never thought like a university like Wits University, which used to be whites only, can have such course, you know, only to find that it has it. And then, but I was influenced to take African literature course by Paswan Impe, who was also a writer and my lecturer as well. So you know, during this orientation, you will find that they stand with there's some stands, you know, with people departments advertising courses. So there, I saw a young person holding books that I've already read at home. And then there was by Chinua Achebe, by Ben Okri, for instance, many of them actually, Shadows, quite a number, but African writers. So I went there and I said, okay, is there a course like this? And I said, okay, I can take this course because it will be -1. This one I know that I'll pass because already, you know, I've already read all these books. So things like academic exclusion, I won't be academically excluded because I can shift my energy into other courses, you know, instead of too much focusing on this one, which I've already read the books.
You know, reading and the habit of reading is something which doesn't just happen. There's some mentors or people that actually introduce you to books. Who was the person that awakened your desire and passion for reading and for books?
Yeah, actually, my brother used to study at the University of Natal. when it was fashionable. You know, so that's the university which was also political. So his books were lots of African literature. It was like, if you remember, well, Steve Biko studied there, and then so people that went there were just very much political. So I started in the 80s, early 80s, I guess, going to mid 80s. So what he used to do was to come with only African literature books from African writer series. So I grew up not knowing. I only discovered people like D.H. Lawrence, people like
Dickens,
Charles Dickens, and whatever at the university. So growing up, it used to be only African literature. So I had read, he would, in his shelf, would be people like Ngugi wa Thiong'o, would be people like Buchi Emechet, there would be people like Njabulo Ndebele, Eskian Pahlele, would be people like all different, Lusophone, Anglophone, and Francophone. All the literature, Kamaralaya, for instance, Mayombe Pepetela. So those are the books that I read when I was maybe still going into high school, you know what I mean? Going into high school. Some of these books, like for instance, were the books that we thought, wow, these ones when you are reading them, they're political books, because we used to admire those people who were in the university, that they got to the university because they would talk about Nelson Mandela without fear. So some of the books you didn't know, because I said to you I studied during apartheid and after apartheid. So when I was reading in the 80s, for instance, there were books that you will read under the blanket, even during the day, or it would be just hidden on the shelf, so that neighbors cannot, even when they come and they mustn't spy on you and say you are reading banned politics, because you didn't know which book was banned and which one was not. So there were books specifically that were my brother would put in a particular box. Like for instance, I read about Long Walk to Freedom. I read around 1986. I read about Sobukwe's speeches. He used to have those, Sobukwe's speeches, only speeches. A short, thin book. So those are the books that will be put, behind it. They will be put in a secret place, because you don't know whether they're banned or not. And I write what I like. Those are the books. Though it was difficult for me to read such kind of books, like I write what I like. But everybody was talking about Steve Biko. I read it, but I couldn't understand the thing. But when you read Sobukwe, I thought, wow, these are the speeches of Sobukwe and stuff. You read Ngugi wa Thiong'o detained. Okay, this is not happening only here in South Africa, it's happening also elsewhere. You read about the men, the beautiful ones are not yet born. Okay, in Ghana as well, such kind of things. So
books were part of appeal to you because they were seen to be part of a subversive thing that you could do.
Yes.
It was dangerous to read.
Yes, it was dangerous to read.
To read really good stuff. I write what I like, Steve Biko's book. I remember one of my social work friends, students with me, she brought it into class one day with brown paper cover. John, look what I've got. This is naughty, we're reading Steve Biko's stuff. I said, well, the best way to make sure an idea is spread is to almost ban it. And the paradox we now have is that we have all so much freedom and choice, and that nobody bothers anymore. And I think that's a real challenge.
It is actually a real challenge, because what's happening is that there used to be a need to read by then. I don't know, maybe it's because now there are lots of things actually that human beings can do. I mean, you can watch TV. By then, few houses had TVs around my street. Some of them, you'll find that, they just live in abject poverty. Like in my home, we didn't have a TV until late around 86 or so. So if you were used to reading before, you'll continue reading that. And I remember my other brother used to like reading the James Hadley Chase kind of, those kind of stories. But because I was more inclined I was more closer to the other brother who was studying at the university, because I also wanted to study at the university around that time. So I really thought, okay, in order for me to be able to be at the university, maybe these are the kind of stuff that I have to read, you know. So it used to be like that. So I'm saying that I just inherited from there and continued with it. So something that we want to inculcate today with the youth. That's why we're going from province to province, you know, selling books and selling African literature, or South African literature for that matter, and talking about the gospel of forming book clubs and so on and so forth, so that people, those are the platforms that they can get people into reading and getting to be interested in seeing the value of reading again, you know.
Yeah, when you cross a threshold, well, I am now a published author.
Oh yeah.
When did that happen?
Yeah, it happened in 2004. Actually, it happened. The reason I was trying to bring all those historical perspective was because when after finishing my degree in 1997, I did a postgrad, and then that postgrad was now law, and then I did for a year at Wits. I passed well, and I went to UCT. And I did it for 3 years, and I failed during the final year of it. You know, so I had lots of law courses, and then I decided, okay, I'm failed. I'm not going back to repeat all these courses. And then I decided that because at that time I was writing the book, which I sent to Kwela in 2002, and then there were promises that okay. We can take this book, we like it, but you have to polish it. So it went there for maybe 21 times. They kept on bringing it back to me, you know, until such time that they said, okay, it's publishable. You know, when you're a first-time author, you think like, oh, this is going to be a hit. I'm going to make money. And then I decided, now, law, I'll see it later. Let me focus on this. So that's when in 2004, my book was published in 2004. I think in April, because
is that Dog Eat Dog?
That's Dog Eat Dog. So it was published in 2004, but the process started off me sending this manuscript to the publisher started in 2002, and they kept on rejecting, going back. So about 20-something times, I cannot, maybe 21 or something, but I know it was over 20 times that I had to redo everything, you know. And then, later on it became a book, and then it became a good book because around that time, when it came out, there were only few authors that you can also count. I mean, Paswan Mpe was one of them. There was also Silo Deka. I think those are the young, I'm talking about young authors, black authors that I know. Those were the ones only that I knew that were, and Silo Deka was more popular because I think it was on his second or third book, I think second book actually. So, and his first book, 13 Cents, was great. I had read it and I thought, I can do something like this. So it's one of the inspirations that I got, you know, almost, and more, especially that he was also a young guy, almost same age as me. So I thought, okay, if he can do it now, I can do it as well. And his stories spoke to me because they are the stories that when he talks about Cape Town, for instance, the unfinished bridge in Cape Town, I thought, okay, I'm here at UCT, I know it. You know, so he talks about writings about talking about simple things, you know, they make bigger picture, you know. So
because you need a life experience before you can really write about life. And you know, obviously, and you can start off with a great imagination, but one gets a sense in your book that you're actually writing from first-hand experience. You're not writing from second-hand distilled, you know, secondary sources sort of thing. You actually, you know, because having lived with the experience I have, it's there. And talking of Ben Okri, because that really, you know, he was a great inspiration to me. In the beginning of my book, I have that lovely quote of his, where he says, stories are the secret reservoir of values. And if you change the stories that people and nations tell themselves, you change the people and the nations. Because if you tell stories that are lies, you're going to have to live the consequences. If you tell stories that confront your own truth or face your own truth, you will free your history for future flowerings. Now that just got straight into my soul.
Yeah.
Wow. So what does a social worker do? Well, a social worker helps people to own their stories and to finish their stories, because if you don't finish your story, somebody else will. So when we're talking about emancipation, liberation, transformation, own your stories.
Yes.
And then nobody can take your story away from you, you see.
Yes.
If you've owned it. But the process of owning your story is a painful one.
Yeah.
You know, there's shame, there's vulnerability, there's unresolved issues, there's heartbreaks and all that stuff.
Definitely.
And I literally wept with that story in the book about the young woman who then has this sugar daddy, this guy, this blessed type, who then takes her to the Michelangelo hotel, and she thinks now this is going to be the resolution of her whole life. They're in love, and she finds out he's an absolute fraudster taking on. I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but there's one of those stories which, let me tell you a secret. This morning I was counselling a client who was risking wanting to go on a particular path. And I said, look, I'm not trying to tell you what to do, but can I just tell you the story? And I told it to them. I said, now think about it. So in that sense, you've been a help to me. You can see what I'm saying. And I don't know what my client's going to do. He's going to make his own choice. But I'm saying, what is your desire, and how can I give you a safe space so that you can process your desire and come to terms with what it is that will really satisfy your desire, rather than lead you into not just a broken heart, as you said, a broken life. Now let's focus on that particular short story, seeing it's kind of most recent in my mind, and tell me, where did you do your research? Did you have to go and spend a few nights in the hotel?
You know, nowadays, actually, I'm surprised that, I'm very much, I respect people, the older generation that used to write, you know, because I think I'm looking at them, when I'm looking from my point of view now, I'm thinking, wow, it might have been difficult to do a research, you know, on that particular story. So at the moment, it's nowadays with us, you know, with social media, the information, it's just around you, you know. It's just even finding genres or themes to write about. It's easier because it's you can just look around you. You open a newspaper today, it will tell you a different story. You check your Facebook, you read what's happening to people, you'll see women talking about trying to find a blesser, or a blesser did A, B, C, and D, you know, such kind of things. So there are lots of things that happen, but also we don't have to rely on such kind of such kind of research alone. You also have to do a bit of observation, you know. I walk a lot as well. When I want to write about a particular place, in most cases, I have to, if I want to write it well, if I can be in that particular place, it's more important for me. That's why it's difficult for me to do fantasy, because my imagination it's very limited to reality somehow, you know, limited to reality. And I feel like I'm controlling a story when I talk about things that I've observed, or the gossip that I've heard, you know, or just a rumor, you know. It's easier, as it makes it believable. So with that particular story, for instance, it was this phenomenon of finding a blesser amongst young women, you know. And also it was also inspired by you know, you go into you know, these fallist movements, for instance, they normally unearth lots of difficulties facing students. At some point I was reading about a particular student who had to you know, leave the university because she couldn't pay for herself. Somebody had to be to sell a body, you know, to do that. And there are quite a number of those. I didn't know that when I was still at Wits. I didn't know that there would be people that sleep in the library, you know. If a library is 24 hours, they will sleep there because they don't have accommodation. So all those stories, you know, I weave them together. And I realize that, okay, let me just talk about this story. It is the story of somebody, because it's the story about somebody who has been at the university and couldn't go. So it's a continuation a little bit of what the theme I'd already written in Dog Eat Dog, you know? It's a theme about facing these problems in the universities. It's a theme about fees must fall. You know, to read about it, you see, like, look, actually, if there was no problem about the fees in the school, in the university or in tertiary, these things wouldn't happen. Somebody wouldn't go and sell their body because they have a goal of becoming something, to have a degree, to have a good job, to support a family in the rural area, you know? If we didn't have these problems about infrastructural, you know, collapse, people would not do like this. So I researched quite a lot, mostly using the problems that are facing the youth, more especially those who are at tertiary education, the vulnerability of women, for instance, of young women, you know, who want to survive and, you know, get into finish university, but they are facing this kind of a problem. They have to take shortcut, you know. To find their way in, you know, young, because the theme I think about this short story, particular short story, it also has to do with teenage pregnancy. For instance, the young girl wants to support a young child at home, also wants to complete at the university because she wants to take care of her family. So it goes also to all those our traditional and social constructs that at home you got siblings that are not working, or you are expected to perform or to look after particular siblings at home. So yeah, so it's a multi-layered. I'll say the theme is multi-layered, but the theme that are foregrounded is the theme of the blessing, somebody wanting to get a blessing, and it's the phenomenon of what is happening at the moment. You know,
in social work, I was taught, they said in development and social work, there's no such thing as problems. There are only people with problems. So what comes out in your work is beautiful human portrayal of people, and not all romanticized and sanitized. I mean, the story about the MEC cheating on his wife and ending up, you know, with his bodyguards not kind of rescuing him in time before the husband comes home. It was kind of graphic. And also in your Facebook post, you said how you were with a bunch of friends who were ANC folk, and they wanted your book.
Yes.
So I thought, thank goodness, some people who are politically in the whole political system are reading your stories, because part of the problem with power, when people get power, they lose touch with reality.
Yes.
And I really, you might see my latest post, don't look to the politicians and the economists to save us.
Yes.
It's the storytellers that are going to help this country.
Yes.
So talk to me a little bit about that aspect of your work, and just where you see things in terms of your stories, at the contribution they can make in our political crisis at the moment.
No, I think actually part of the political crisis that we're having at the moment is mostly because politicians don't read. And another thing, these politicians are supposed to be reading because, or reading relevant kind of literature. When I say relevant literature, I'm just saying our literature, what we write about, because that's where they'll find the voices of the people that are voting for them, you know. So if they read our work, for instance, they'll be able to understand that, okay, actually, if in June, okay, there are people that need shelter, for instance. Not only in June, there are people that need shelter. Instead of us as CEOs going to sleep in some particular, you know, in some particular, and say we're raising funds, we can do better than that, you know. So, but they can find that from our own stories if they can read. One other thing is that they will also understand that if they read our work, people they will understand that one of the reasons that many people maybe didn't go through their matric or whatever is because maybe the curriculum was not devised in a good way. Last time I posted about Shakespeare, that it was my stumbling block when I was writing. Nothing wrong about reading Shakespeare, but I was saying that if we can read Shakespeare together with our work in South Africa, we can help to balance these things, you know, and to get people to read. Because the more the nation reads, is the more it gets interested and involved in the day-to-day running of their own country and their own affairs. So to such an extent that if somebody wants to talk about changing curriculum, it doesn't have to be a top-bottom kind of a thing. It has to be a discussion with the people that we are leading, you know, because they will say, oh, no, we cannot do this to our kids and feed only Shakespeare. Let's put a little bit of Njabulenda Ndebele there. Let's put a little bit of, you know, Spue Mahala or Tando Mkoloza and whoever. You know, let's put these people into here so that when our kids read, they are interested. These people will make them interested because these are their stories. So they'll be interested in reading. And then once a person is interested in reading, then they can read vastly, you know, but they will have preference of the stories that talk about themselves. They'll be able to, right now we're going to talk about decolonizing education. It's also because of that, you know, because our education system, since it was structured around the apartheid era, that, okay, you are forced to do these particular courses. Everybody's forced to do mathematics. During my time, everybody was forced to do mathematics, even if you're not good at it. And then once you fail that one, it's bad. You know, everybody was forced to do Afrikaans. And if you fail Afrikaans, you can pass the rest, but you fail, you know. It's because that kind of, it was just an imposition. So, but now, if you want people to be involved, you know, we need to make them aware that they can participate, and to make things easier for them to participate. So I want my work, for instance, to help alleviate that problem. At the moment, there's a big illiteracy rate in this country, you know. There's a big, lots of dropouts in the, you know, universities, also dropouts in the in high schools. For if we can engage people.
Now, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Shakespeare, because I really feel that the most useful training for me as a social worker was Shakespeare. Not because of all his archaic English and all the kind of poetry and all the rest. His extraordinary insight into human nature. Who is the African Shakespeare? Who is the writer in the African, the decolonised context that is going to help us get that extraordinary ability to get empathy for these characters that Shakespeare was able to portray, you know, 500 years ago? Anyone that comes to mind besides yourself?
No, but yeah, I think I like the question in the sense that, you know, at the moment, there are a lot of literature that has come out of South Africa since, for instance, 2004, to be specific. Lots of it. Actually, earlier on when I was talking, I talked about Silo Deika and Paswanimbe being around that. I'm talking about the black, young black South Africans. But at the moment, if you count them, they even reach about 200 authors that we can count, keep on counting. Books are coming every day. Perhaps our challenge, instead of singling out all this, our challenge is to search from all those kind of writers, all those texts that have been written. If we can read them, it's not a matter of getting Shakespeare at once, if we want Shakespeare, for instance. Or do we need Shakespeare indeed? You know, that's the questions that we have to ask ourselves. But I think we need to get something that is relevant to us, you know, something that is relevant to us. And I think the young crop of writers at the moment, they've done exactly that. So you will find all those images that you are asking in each and every one of us. Maybe in Niq you'll find the characterization, you know, in somebody else you'll find the theme, this important theme has come up. Even ourselves in South Africa, this young generation, even the older generations, but I'm just emphasizing the young generations of authors, is because they've been, I feel like they're a little bit neglected in the, in the whole spectrum of literary landscape in South Africa. So, but if we put our minds and read them, we will find all these beautiful, these little bits of things that we're looking for, the Shakespeare's or whatever, that we're looking for in each and every one of us. Like, at the moment, there are themes that actually talk to us. Like, for instance, you read Tulin Kapu's book that was shortlisted recently in Sunday Times. It talks about an issue that I never thought to do, the issue of incest. It's an issue that in most black communities, at least where I come from, it's never talked about, So those are the things, So other people will talk about the issue of, you just quoted my short story, and it's not only one of them, which talks about mental illness. It's something that we use not to talk about within the black communities, It's either somebody's bewitched or something else. But at the moment, because of the modern world that we're living in, those stories resonate with everybody.
The last question is a more technical one, and that is just about writing short stories. Because it's quite difficult in a short story to follow the full cycle of the journey of consciousness, whereas you're reading War and Peace. It's like 2,000 pages. Where did you get that particular gift from? Was that something you've had to practice?
Actually, it's trial and error. Everything is trial and error. I think I like the fact that you quoted even Ben Okri first and then also on this short story. I think it's quote just to paraphrase is that if the novel is an ocean, then a short story is the river that feeds that ocean. And in a river it's a drinkable water. So I think my understanding of that is that the short stories, the greatest thing about it is that if you follow a theme, you can easily follow a particular theme. So I'm theme driven to such an extent that when I'm theme driven, I don't lose sight of what I want to talk about. So it keeps me focused. So that's why it's easier when you follow a theme, when I follow a theme, to have my short story to draw a conclusion on that particular theme that I've risen, So an example is that when I first wrote Dog Eat Dog, for instance, my first novel, it was just an experience, just an haphazard experience in the university, more especially the experience in terms of how hard it is to get financed, how hard is it to get accommodation, and also coming from a background of a public school during apartheid time, which were ill-equipped, But right now, because I couldn't follow that particular theme alone, because I was writing a novel. Certain things came in, and then only to find that when I read my novel as well, I don't know that it's multi-themed. So that takes away what you want to tell the people. So with a short story is that when you are driven by a theme, you know that if I have to write about homelessness, the story has to conclude on homelessness. I think I've learned that I have to focus on a particular thing. Like for Roald Dahl, for instance, for me, is one of my most favorite short story tellers. So I read quite a lot of his short stories, and they are theme-driven. And I thought, wow, let me take South African themes and talk about them in this way,
Well, I'm rather regretting that I didn't actually have this conversation with you before I wrote my book. Because that's why I was teasing you when you said once you finished reading War and Peace, well, the next mountain you have to climb is to read the next one. And maybe we must say that when you have read it, let's have another conversation.
Yes.
So you can give me feedback. Because what I've done in my book, A Promise of Justice, is extraordinarily complicated, because I've tried to weave a historical story about the Amampondo conflict with Cecil John Rhodes and the King as a backdrop to a current story, at the same time trying to make an intervention as a social worker to try and influence the outcome of the story. And in a sense, well, the king did win his constitutional case against Jacob Zuma. But I've been surprised that people don't seem to get it. Because there are too many themes to it. So you're going to have rescue me. And I'm going to start writing short stories. I'm sure all my readers will be delighted.
I'm looking forward to reading that.
And how can we help your Facebook friends, all of us, this community of people? How can we help you take it further?
It's to buy books. Buy my books, not only my books, buy lots of South African literature, and then more especially, as I said earlier on, the writing crop that is coming up now. You know, they are writing very well, and they are writing about things that are topical and themes that really speak to us. So maybe to get the people to read is to maybe people that go to the communities. You can, if people cannot buy books, buy for them, donate for them, you know, and stuff. But buy South African. The most important thing is to buy so that also artists can be encouraged to write and also survive through it. So if you buy, the more you buy is the more we have the right to write. You know,
If I may end, you know, just I'm sure people are watching. What is this little figurine sitting here? We started with talking about Soweto. This is my friend Tema from Soweto, from the Chawela project, where Mandla Mentor, who is the guy that I was working with there during the World Summit, he was taking waste, blowing in the streets, turning into paper mache, and using his art to create it. And I asked Melissa, I don't know what you think too, it shows you how you can take the mess of life and turn it into something artistic and creative and expressive. So I want to suggest that that's what storytelling is about, and getting back to being art, and hoping that we can encourage young people to discover their creative soul, and then so that they can tell their stories.
I love it.